Good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started here. This is the 9:30 budget panel, which I can't imagine there's any interest in this year. Sitting here today, we have Representative Tim Ormsby, who chairs the House Appropriations Committee, Senator June Robinson, who chairs the Senate Ways and Means Committee, Ranking Member Senator Chris Gildon, and Ranking Member Travis Couture of the Ways and Means Committee, or Appropriations Committee. So then just leading off, about 2 weeks ago, the governor proposed his supplemental budget, which,
Hard to hear you.
oh, is this better?
Yeah.
Sorry about that, guys. So about 2 weeks ago, the governor proposed his supplemental budget, which calls for about $2.3 billion, or pins the deficit at about $2.3 billion. It calls for about $800 million in cuts, proposes tapping into the rainy day fund for about $1 billion, closing some tax preferences to balance the budget for the current biennium. Leading off, what was your reaction to this proposal, and do you think that's an adequate starting point for these upcoming negotiations? Representative Ormsby?
Yeah, I think the governor did a responsible job of identifying the shortfall. I think the legislature will get more updated, more thorough, more in-depth information as time goes on, which will help us craft a just budget. I think my first reaction was, I believe it's clear the difficult choices that are in front of us, and I think the governor confronted those initially, and that does give us a roadmap, which was his intention, give us a roadmap to resolving the shortfall.
Senator Robinson?
Thank you. Yeah, I concur with my colleague, Representative Ormsby. The governor's budget is a good starting place for us. I know that he and his team struggled with the decisions at hand, as we in the legislature will in the days ahead. But I think he made responsible decisions, and we'll take a look at all of them and make our own decisions in the next 60 days. But I think it's a great starting place for us.
Senator Gildon?
Sure, thank you, and good morning, everyone. You know, I always try to be optimistic, even against any odds. I always try to be optimistic. And so there are a couple of things that I appreciated in the governor's budget. But there were also some things of concern, I think, is one of them that the budget does not balance over the 4-year period, which he's allowed to not balance over the 4-year period by law. But I would have liked to have seen him made an effort to balance over 4 years as opposed to just leave us out of balance. And then the other thing that caught my eye is, while he did find about $3 billion in policy reductions, he also found $3.1 billion in new policy spending. And so those are the two things that really caught my eye off the bat. But I always try to be optimistic.
Representative Couture?
Thank you. Yeah, I'd agree with Senator Gildon there. I think it's not responsible. I think it's reckless to essentially try not to balance the budget. That's number one. But on top of that, it grows spending. And we have a spending addiction in this state. We don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. We have never had more revenue in the state of Washington than we do right at this very moment. And it does continue to grow, although the growth has slowed. But we grew, the governor's budget grows spending by over $1 billion and only cuts about 85 million with an M. And, you know, they had a whole year at OFM and the governor's office last year to figure out this mess. And I view the governor's budget as wholly unserious. And on top of that, on top of not balancing, they're trying to raid the rainy day fund, roughly $1 billion, which is, you know, also reckless and irresponsible for the fiscal health of our state, our bond and credit rating, and it would leave us with less than 2 weeks of operating money. So, I mean, we're number 2 in the country for the lowest amount of reserves, and this would put us at 3% reserves. We got to do much better than that. We got to find ways to cut spending in this state and find efficiencies in our state agencies and everywhere else. Because after the outlook period, once you hit 2029, you have $1 billion for Fair Start for Kids, and you have all these other things because no hard decisions were made last session. They were just kicked down the road for a future legislature and future taxpayers to bear. And of course, now we face an unconstitutional income tax and other tax increases that will once again threaten the citizens of Washington.
The other proposal that the governor unveiled about 2 weeks ago was the income tax on millionaires, which when in effect would impact about 0.5% of Washington residents. And it, just to clarify, it's on revenue or income more than $1 million, not necessarily $1 million in assets. The governor indicated that this revenue wouldn't be available until 2029 at the earliest. And although he sounded optimistic that it could pass during this current session, he also said that voters would likely have the opportunity to weigh in at some point. Given the lack of an income tax in Washington currently, I was just wondering if you think it's feasible to pass this session, and I guess if so, why now? Representative Ormsby?
I think we need to look at our revenue options, absolutely. And the feasibility will be determined as time goes on. I don't really like delving into the finance part of it because the House has an entire committee dedicated to our finance, revenue, fees, et cetera. And I have every confidence in their ability to discern what is feasible and present to the rest of us a proposal. I think it is worth looking at. We have departed from where personal income and revenue have diverged, and going from a production manufacturing-based economy to a service-based economy, we need to make those adjustments, and that was part of the effort earlier or in last session.
Senator Robinson?
We will see if it's feasible to pass the millionaire's tax this session or not. It is a proposal, obviously, that's been talked about for a few months. It's seems to have momentum. It will not help us with the current supplemental budget, nor really much in the 27-29, as even if we pass it this year and it goes to the voters and goes through all of that, we do anticipate that it'll be several years before we would see any revenue from it. So it's not a short-term solution by any means, but it is a potential way to keep our state revenue in, as Representative Ormsby mentioned, in line with personal income in the state, because we've really, we hear that state spending keeps increasing. Yes, it does, as personal income in the state also continues to increase.
Senator Gildon?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this is a prime example of the tax-first agenda that we see coming from the majority party every single year, it seems like. We finished off last legislative session. I'll just take you on a recap. Last year, about this time, we were facing a budget shortfall, and there was a lot of talk about taxing the rich, making the rich pay their fair share. In the end, we ended up with about $12.5 billion of taxes that largely fall on the backs of working class and poor people all across our state. Now, this year, we're facing a budget shortfall, and there's talk about taxing the rich, making the rich pay their fair share. If past performance is an indicator of future actions, then I think that we know where we're going to be headed this year. And I'll say, you don't fix regressive tax system by just piling on and layering more and additional taxes. If you want to be serious about fixing regressivity in our state, you need to talk about reducing the tax burden on the poor and the middle class. You just can't complain about a regressive tax system while making it more regressive. There was a quote from the Senate Majority Leader just the other day when asked about Initiative 2111 that passed in 2024 by 38-11 in the state Senate, which prohibited an income tax in our state. And he said that it was a Mary Poppins promise, pie crust promise, easily made, easily broken. I don't think any of us should ever call this a millionaire tax again, because we know where this is headed. We should call this a first slice of the pie tax, because this is just the first slice of the pie. It is going to expand to everyone eventually. The only reason that we're passing it this year, as Senator Robinson alluded to, is because they want to get it into the courts. They want to pass the income tax, let it work its way through the courts, and then eventually expand it out to each and every person in Washington state for a universal income tax. So we should never call this a millionaire tax. That's a ruse. This is the first slice of the pie tax.
Representative Couture.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just add on to that, first it was tax the billionaires, now it's tax the millionaires, and tomorrow it'll be tax the thousandaires. It'll be the rest of us. Frankly, that's why voters continuously and over time deny income taxes in the state, because they simply do not trust the fact that we will eliminate sales or B&O taxes or anything else. And as proof positive of that, we passed a capital gains income tax that's supposed to fund education, school construction. And the governor's budget takes the diminishing revenues from the capital gains tax and rates that account to help balance the budget in his reckless spending in Olympia. And so the capital gains tax went up with $1 million surcharge. The estate tax, the death tax went up again. And, at some point, you got to see the writing on the wall. And this is why voters wholly in Washington state do not trust. Well, if the legislature passes an income tax, that one, it will remain on millionaires or anyone else who is the rich. And on top of that, we're going to get capital flight, much like we got when we passed the capital gains tax. Everyone remembers Jeff Bezos moving to Florida and others on the West Coast and other states, including ours, already looking to move, the innovators, the job creators, move out of our state because of things just like this. And we've officially hit the Laffer curve. We just passed the largest tax increases in state history last session. And we are still facing multi-billion-dollar deficits. It is a spending problem. We have an addiction, and it has to be solved. And you don't solve an addiction by giving people more booze and drugs to consume. And the booze and drugs in this scenario is more revenue, more tax dollars. And the Laffer curve is simply this. If you've taxed too much, you start seeing diminishing returns. And that is exactly what we keep seeing in the economic revenue forecasts that we get all the time with the diminishing returns. So this is a false promise. Voters do not want it. It's unconstitutional. And no one trusts that it will remain on just millionaires.
Just one last question. We'll open up to audience questions. The governor has frequently talked about some of the challenges in budgeting, considering the uncertainty in federal funding to the state. In his most recent budget proposal, the governor said that there's approximately $15 billion in federal funding at risk over the next decade, I believe. From your perspective and just from your positions, what challenge does that uncertainty have, if it does, in your budgeting process? Representative Couture, we'll start on the far end.
I was expecting to go first. Can you repeat the question?
Absolutely. The governor has frequently talked about the challenges in the federal funding uncertainty on the state budget. In his most recent budget proposal, the governor said that there's approximately $15 billion in federal funding at risk for the state over the next decade or so. What impact does that have on the budgeting process for the state of Washington?
Yeah, well, first of all, the governor can, begin to, start following some federal laws, and that would place us under less threat of losing federal funding. But on top of that, the biggest complaint is HR 1 and the loss of potential Medicaid funds and food assistance. For Washingtonians. But, I'll note that last session, the governor signed the largest Medicaid cut in state history. Almost, $782 million, almost $1 billion cut by the governor and the majority party out of Medicaid for our citizens, our low income, disabled people, and seniors in this state. And the Republican budget framework that I've put together restores those Medicaid funds and all the federal matching funds. because it realizes that we could cut wasteful spending, nearly $3.7 or $4 billion in wasteful spending, and still not, destroy vulnerable people's coverage, healthcare coverage, or anything else. There's a host of problems that we have to fix in this state. And there is ways that our state can smooth the path and make sure that we responsibly implement H.R. 1 in this state to make sure that, certain populations of people don't fall through the cracks as it relates to food assistance. And then Republicans have put together and made sure that, veterans, disabled people, homeless folks, wouldn't fall through the cracks with food assistance, but also that we would restore Medicaid. And that is something the governor's budget does not truly do. Right now we are paying hundreds of millions of dollars for illegal immigrant health care in this state while cutting nearly $1 billion from our own citizens. That's wrong. We got to do much better than that, and I haven't seen a proposal that tackles that problem. And so, we can complain about federal funding or tariffs or all sorts of things, which you will hear throughout the session, those complaints. But whatever impact tariffs may have, it is not the same impact as $9.5 billion in tax increases, over $13 billion if you include the gas and diesel tax increases and everything else in the transportation budget. $2 billion does not equal $9.5 billion, you guys. And at the end of the day, what the federal government is asking for in food assistance programs like SNAP is to lower its extremely high error rates and to make sure that when the federal government sends money to the states to administer for programs like SNAP, that the state is actually administering those federal funds properly. This is basic accountability. This is making sure that error rates in SNAP don't become just a data point, but that they're an actual performance metric.
Senator Gildon?
I don't think there's too much more to add there. H.R. 1 and tariffs and the threat of tariffs, they all have an impact on our state economy, right? No doubt. That's just the truth. But as Representative Couture also said, you've got to tell the truth across the entire economic ecosystem. You can't just call out one area while ignoring the other. And certainly, to use your number, 15 billion over 10 years, that's $1.5 billion a year. We just passed $12 billion worth of new taxes. We just cut $750 million of Medicaid from the state. Our tort liability is going through the roof every year. If we don't do something to fix our tort liability in this state in just a couple of years, we'll be spending more in tort liability costs than we do for the University of Washington and Washington State University combined. I think that we've got to act on this. I think there's going to be a bipartisan proposal that'll be coming forward, and I'm hopeful that we'll get that through. But if you're going to talk about H.R. 1 and you're going to talk about tariffs, then you've also got to talk about the actions of our state that have an impact on affordability for the people of our state.
Senator Robinson?
Thank you. Well, all of us up here sit on the Economic and Revenue Forecast Council, and we've continuously heard this entire year that the reason that our revenue forecasts are below what was projected is because of tariffs and the effect of tariffs on our state economy. And that's not something I'm making up. That is what the experts are in our Economic and Revenue Forecast Council have repeatedly told us. As far as H.R. 1, some of the spending that my colleagues across the aisle like to criticize the governor for is $357 million in the supplemental budget in order for the state to implement H.R. 1. That is a lot of spending that could be going to providing services for people that is being used to put in new IT systems in order to be able to comply with the new rules under H.R. 1 for both SNAP and Medicaid. So there are immediate and ongoing effects that we are having to deal with as a result of what's coming at us from DC.
Representative Ormsby?
Thanks, Mitchell. So to the crux of the question, what does it do? It provides great uncertainty for appropriators, not knowing what the federal government is going to do to provide guidance, which we have not received all the guidance we would need in order to understand the impacts of H.R. 1. We have been in partnership with the federal government for the entire, particularly on Medicaid since its inception, and that partnership is in jeopardy. I feel like the administration is sweeping out the legs of the state's ability to provide critical services. And I would just note on the cut that the legislature made on Medicaid, that was in large measure administrative costs, not direct services. And no one was kicked off Medicaid under the proposal in H.R. 1. Potentially hundreds of thousands of folks, whether it's through Medicaid or through the exchange on the subsidies, are going to be losing their health care. And unless we get federal action in the short term, that's going to provide big uncertainty.
All righty, we're going to open this up to questions. Chris Daniels?
All right, this is a little weird here. Good morning. It sounds like everybody's trying to figure out a way to save money, and in Minnesota, there has been documented cases of fraud with child care centers that have been publicly subsidized. Here in Washington State, the former auditor, Brian Sontag, a Democrat, has suggested there should be an outside review or audit of our funding with DCYF. In 2024, an audit here in the state suggested there were not adequate controls of $500 million that were sent and used by DCYF, and that DCYF has acknowledged in the last year an overpayment of $2 million. Polling on our air at Como TV suggests that people want an outside audit. Representative Couture has sponsored a bill 2058 to do just that. So the question for all four of you is, do you support an outside audit of DCYF? And if not, why?
Representative Couture?
Okay, I'll go first. Thank you, Chris, for that question. Yeah, it's really concerning what we're seeing in Minnesota. And of course, there's allegations and concerns of what we're starting to see with child care overpayments here in Washington State. DCYF kind of has the reverse King Midas touch. Everything they touch turns to crap. And I would say, just look at everything that they do. Child welfare, we have record amounts of child fatalities in this state. Our juvenile detention system is in shambles right now. We have no capacity, and we're actually putting adults in juvenile detention, which if we just stop that practice, we would immediately solve it. But no one has the political will here in the majority party to do that here. But now we have child care overpayments. Sometimes when you're looking at them, way over the amount, 4 times the amount that they could reasonably receive in subsidies if they were fully enrolled. But nobody has any answers. So we have a state auditor's audit from 2017, and then 2020, and then DCYF's own audit of itself, its own report of child care overpayments. But yet we can't seem to get anyone from DCYF to explain to us in the legislature what controls they put into place. And so for a long time, what it seems like to me is that, they were dishing out payments to providers and maybe asking questions later. And that problem is not just with DCYF, that is in many state agencies, as we've seen with the Community Reinvestment Program fraud, alleged fraud that's been going on with the Community Reinvestment Program, where people in those NGOs are taking all of that money that was supposed to go to minority people and not going towards its actual purpose. I mean, just tons of NGOs in King County. So what 2058 actually does, it doesn't just target, childcare providers. It is for all public dollars going to private entities. And because we have this pervasive problem where there is no controls. And I mean, look, it took a whole thing in Minnesota and some people digging around in Washington just to actually read for the first time what the state auditor's reports were from years ago. And so we have tons and tons of reports here in the legislature. Nobody reads them, and that's a problem. We got hundreds and hundreds of them, and nobody reads them. But oftentimes they're filled with what the problems and controls actually are. So what I think people in Washington State want, especially when they're being hammered with the largest tax increases in state history and facing yet again maybe another income tax or 5% Seattle Jumpstart payroll tax or whatever it may be, that is this buffet of new taxes coming here this session in Washington State, that they want to be able to, one, get measurable results, actual results for the money they spend in these programs, but then two, that they're not just being stolen from them, and then their taxes being raised to make sure that we continue to fund these, malicious areas where the money is being wasted or not being used appropriately. So we should have third-party audits because we can't expect the state agencies to grade their own homework anymore. That has failed. And so I propose 2058 to have that third-party outside audit to not just see what the measurable results are, but also to make sure that the money is being spent appropriately and that we have a non-biased entity that hasn't been appointed by Democrats for the last 40 years to actually look into the programs and not just look into their friends.
Representative Ormsby.
Yeah, I am fine with accountability and transparency. I would like to know what controls are in place. We have internal audits, the Joint Legislative Audit Review Committee that serves as that function. We also have a state auditor, and I would be interested to know what is the best combination and what Representative Couture's view of what an independent third-party auditor would look like, because we certainly have auditor functions available to the legislature and through the statewide elected state auditor in order to be able to perform those functions. So if those accountability and measurement metrics aren't adequate enough, then it would be worth looking at. I think we need to explore what is at our disposal right now, which I think, and find out what, if anything, are the shortfalls with the current system before we go down a road of, trying to uncover stuff. I have not seen any evidence of childcare fraud. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, and by DCYF's own admission, they found $2 million, I believe was a part of the question, which isn't a substantial amount of money. Certainly, we would like that to be in the Treasury currently. I would like to understand the potential impact before making any judgment.
Senator Gilton.
Sure, thank you. So I guess a couple of things on that, right, is certainly support accountability, transparency, all of that. I think one of the things that there's two things I think I would propose is, one, the legislature cut funding to the state auditor's office just last year. I think if there's any agency that we should increase funding to, it would be the state auditor, because we're going to get a return on that investment. And I think that we should also fund them to a sufficient level where they're able to do an audit of 20% of the state agencies every year, so that we get an ongoing review to make sure that we're spending money wisely. The other thing that I think we need to do is, under current law, state agencies are required to report fraud, but individual state employees are not. I think that we should require state employees to report fraud when they come across it, and every person who's newly hired into the state should receive training saying that they are required to report fraud as well as how to report it. So those are the couple of things that I would add.
Senator Robinson.
Thank you. I take, oversight of public resources very seriously. And of course, nobody wants fraud. Nobody wants people who are not playing by the rules to receive state funding. I look forward to working with the governor, the separately elected state auditor that the people of Washington have elected, and our agencies, as well as our legislative staff, who we are a separate branch. We do our own analysis and work. I would like to explore all the options that we currently have available for oversight, which we have a lot of potential within our system right now before we spend additional money for more audits. And I just want to let Representative Couture know that I do read legislative reports. You may think no one reads them, but I'm one of those weird people that actually reads the ones that come into my box. So I appreciate them. Thank you.
All righty. John Stang.
One question for the Democrats, one question for the Republicans. Both of them are on the income tax. Democrats, how do you design an income tax bill that would survive arguments before the Supreme Court, because it'll inevitably go there? Republicans, I want you to factor out the constitutionality issue, factor out the camel's nose in the tent issue. I make $1 million, I keep $900,000. That's not going to change my lifestyle one bit. What the heck is the wrong with a tax on someone making $1 million?
Yeah, I guess I'll start that off. Yeah, I guess if you cancel out all the most important aspects of it and just look at the, the pure why should I care, it's because we have capital flight. And the capital flight costs us jobs, costs us innovation. I mean, we're a state built on innovation. We have a large tech sector that, does make incredible amounts of money, but then they turn that money around and give people six-figure jobs with 401ks and healthcare and benefits and everything else. So why would it affect, the rest of us?
I would like to challenge that. If, again, making $900,000 as opposed to $1 million, that's not going to wreck my life enough for me to leave the state if I like living in the state.
Well, I mean, to me, I don't think that matches with the evidence of what we see with people who are upset that would be subject to the tax are already thinking about moving out of this state. And similarly, moving out of California for similar things. And you know what? We're losing 48 taxpayers per day in Washington state. And while states like Florida are gaining somewhere like 400 or 500 taxpayers per day. And that's the capital flight that we see. We have a lot of people that are fleeing Washington state, and maybe not just for an income tax, but as the sum total of all of the tax increases and all of the burdensome regulations and the huge problem we have with public safety and crime. And we are one of the most unaffordable places to live. The cost of gas, groceries, rent, insurance, healthcare, you name it. Almost every measurable category, we are one of the worst in the country. And we have the highest gas prices, but our neighbors just to the east in Idaho, they have zero problem and are providing tax relief to their citizens right now. And so it's not a national problem, it is a Washington state problem. We've spent too much, and now the income tax is being proposed so that, we could cover up for budget negligence, and that's wrong.
Representative Ormsby.
Thank you, Mitchell. I think it is highly speculative, John, what would pass muster with the state Supreme Court and prior decisions, et cetera. I think it's worth finding out. What the Supreme Court will decide to do is unknown, and I think it is very specific to how the legislation is written and who it affects. I have no problem. I can look myself in the mirror and my constituents in the face if we're taxing a certain percentage of over $1 million. So $1 million goes in someone's pocket, it remains the same as it currently is under Washington State Tax Code. Over $1 million, different story. So, and as you pointed out, it is not going to change anyone's lifestyle at that level. So let's talk about the specific proposal. And we don't have one to unpack, and, to thoroughly understand, but I think that is the process of creating legislation and answering all those uncertainties as we go through it. So I think the idea that we have capital flight, I have not seen any evidence of that whatsoever, and I believe that the quality of life in Washington State demands a good state budget to provide the services that our residents expect.
Senator Gildon.
Yeah, sure, thank you. I'm going to push back a little bit on this idea that capital flight's not a real thing in a number of areas. But the first thing that I'd say is this doesn't fix regressivity, right? This is just a layering of another tax. And you should probably go out and talk to a couple of rich people and get their perspective on it. And maybe that'd be a good interview for you to do. Because if you do, they're going to talk about our tax system, and they're going to talk about the entire tax system. They're going to talk about B&O taxes. They're going to talk about sales tax. They're going to talk about the gas tax. They're going to talk about the 35% inheritance tax that they're going to be liable for, and then add on a 10% income tax on top of that. The layering, the constant layering is what's going to drive the people away from our state, innovators away from our state. As Joe Nguyen, Director of Commerce, likes to say, if you want to tax rich people, you have to have rich people to tax. And we need to create an environment that attracts people to invest and innovate in our state. The other part about this is you're missing half of the equation in your question, because it doesn't just apply to rich people. It also applies to S-corps and LLCs, small businesses, which will be affected by this particular tax. So it's much more vast than the question indicates.
And I just want to add on to that we have the highest small business failure rate in the nation.
Senator Robinson.
And the question for us is around constitutionality or the decision by the Supreme Court.
Around the fact that it's technically, it is unconstitutional under the Constitution. How do you design it? Can you design, and how do you design
Well,
a millionaire income tax that would survive a legal challenge?
I mean, we are not the Supreme Court, so I'm not going to say that we can do that, because that's their decision, and they are the third branch of government. They get to make that ruling. Our job is to pass the best legislation that we can that meets the needs of the people of Washington, and we do the best, and the Supreme Court will make their independent decision.
All right, do we have time for a few more questions? Brandy?
I do have a question.
Well, 1 second, wait for the.
I do have a question of my own, but just to follow up, Representative Ormsby, on your answer to John's question, you said you've seen no evidence of tax flight or wealth flight. Forbes estimates Jeff Bezos saved $954 million in capital gains taxes by moving to Florida. So what do you mean you've seen no evidence of tax flight?
That's one example, and I believe that if you unpack that, it was for personal reasons, not business reasons or dollar reasons. That's where he originated. He returned home. He built his wealth here in this state because of the infrastructure and ability and technical expertise that we have. My understanding is his situation was personal, not based on tax liability, but for personal reasons.
My own question, obviously there's going to be a lot of debate this session about whether you really just want a millionaire's tax or whether you want to tax everyone's income eventually. Representative Larry Springer was asked this week, have you seen the clip? I can reiterate it. He was asked this week at the Bellevue Chamber of Commerce legislative preview why Washingtonians should trust that a party that's always said it wants an income tax suddenly doesn't want one, it just wants to tax millionaires. And he said, you shouldn't trust that. He literally said, a member of your own caucus, of your own party, that Washingtonians should not trust you guys if you try to suggest that you only want to tax the income of millionaires. So do you only want to tax the income of millionaires, or are you willing to admit that eventually the plan is to tax everyone's income?
I don't have any plans. We're not counting on the millionaires portion of it, as has been described. There has to be a bill. It has to be scrutinized. It has to be marked up and given a fiscal note. So let's focus on the policy that's in front of us, not speculate about what that means in the future. I do not have plans on that money being of help in the short term. As Senator Robinson explained, it wouldn't come in to be a benefit to the state until at least 2 years, if not longer. So it is not a short-term fix. So this whole camel's nose under the tent slippery slope argument is not relevant to the policy that will be before the legislature. That would come in the future, and it would go through the same scrutinizing and unpacking process that any legislation in any committee that has any fiscal impact whatsoever would go through that same scrutiny.
Can you respond to Representative Springer, again, your fellow caucus member's assertion that Washingtonians should not trust your caucus when they say that this is a millionaire's tax and not a road to an income tax?
I don't have any comment on that. That's the first I've heard of it. I know Representative Springer well. I'm happy to check in with him about that, but I had not heard that, and it's certainly not my opinion.
Senator Robinson, is the goal, and do you personally want an income tax in the state of Washington?
I want to do what the people of Washington support, which is taxing wealth. So I'm interested in a millionaire's tax.
So you wouldn't support down the road lowering that threshold from a millionaire's tax to an income tax?
Today, I support a millionaire's tax.
Tomorrow? 5 years from now?
It's tomorrow and 5 years from now, and then the question will be relevant.
Alrighty, Seattle Times, Drake Fay.
I'm curious about the idea the governor has proposed of making sure that somehow there's tax relief included in a millionaire's tax. How do we, and this is why it's a very apropos question for budget writers, how do we write that in? How do we make that a part? Is there a mechanism that you would include to ensure that there would be some tax relief if we truly are trying to make a tax system less regressive?
Absolutely. You put it in the bill. You put the tax relief in the bill.
I'd like to respond and just say that, Senator Jamie Peterson, the majority leader in the Senate, has already said about the income tax ban that was the initiative that was overwhelmingly passed, including the one he voted for. It was mentioned, I think, by Senator Gildon that he was quoted in KUOW as that was a pie crust promise, easily made, easily broken. And that's exactly the fear we have with this income tax proposal. You could promise everything in politics, but it's about what do you trust? And there isn't any trust there, and that's why voters continuously vote against that. And as I outlined before, we've already increased the threshold of the estate tax, the death tax, capital gains tax, $1 million surcharges on B&O, and everything else, right? As much as we talk about regressive taxes, the largest tax increase was the sales and B&O taxes last session. The largest tax increase in state history was the most regressive tax in state history. And we can't forget the other most regressive tax, which is the carbon tax, the CCA on your gallon of gas, 56, 60 cents. That is the most regressive tax. And the B&O is wholly unfair. So where it might sound great that, you reduce or get rid of parts of B&O and sales tax, but how are we supposed to trust people when they make pie crust promises after just voting to ban an income tax that they wouldn't tax people under $1 million?
Alrighty, Carlene at the Center Square.
So my question is for Senator Robinson or Representative Ormsby, are you hearing from constituents in your home districts that the recent increase in taxes, whether it's B&O or sales taxes, some of the stuff that's hitting somebody that just wants to teach a CPR class that has more than one person now has to pay or will soon have to pay. Are you hearing from any constituents in your districts that the tax burden is currently crushing them?
I've not heard that the new taxes on services are shutting things down. There is a concern about certainty and just getting proper guidance from the Department of Revenue and they're interested in doing their part, but they're uncertain and don't want to make a mistake, don't want to do it wrong, and they're still awaiting guidance from Department of Revenue on what's in, what's out. And I think this is something that Department of Revenue is experiencing, didn't anticipate. These are always happens. You implement something, there are things that you hadn't anticipated for. And I think I have not heard that they're shutting things down or that it's crushing them. I've heard we want more and better information on how to comply.
And I hear from constituents and non-constituents constantly about all sides of tax issues. I've met with a lot of constituents and non-constituents over the interim about the taxes that you're talking about, I think, the expansion to sales tax on services. I think there will need to be some adjustments made to some aspects of that. I know other folks are working on bills. Taxes are not popular, not surprising, and we hear from people all the time about them.
Can I just, real quick, I'm a small business owner. I have 6 employees. I'm one of the few people in the legislature that signs the front of the paycheck and not the back, right? And I could tell you from my own personal lived experience that it is hell in Washington State being a small business owner. The B&O tax is the most unfair tax in the nation. It's not accounting for your expenses. It's not accounting for your cost of goods sold or your payroll, right? And I spend an incredible amount of money, not just in taxes with B&O and sales and everything else, but with all the other things. Washington Cares, L&I, and you name it. And it feels like a lot of these things are weaponized against small business, which is probably why we have the highest small business failure rate in the nation. We have to be more cognizant of that. And, to say that it doesn't hurt, I have a constituent of mine who's also a business owner who is moving his operation to Arizona because of the new digital advertising sales tax that was levied was costing him over $2,000 extra a month in his business. And now we're losing not only another taxpayer and not only another good family, but another business, another small business in this state to a state with friendlier tax policy. And, as the reports have shown, our tax competitiveness nationally has spiraled, has absolutely spiraled. We used to be very competitive just, like a decade ago or less, but now we're entering near the bottom of tax competitiveness. We have some of the highest tax burden in the nation. This is just unsustainable. And all we have to do is realize that we have some of the highest amounts of revenue ever. We have $78 billion. You just have to prioritize the spending and spend it correctly. And you have to find efficiencies in government to make sure that people are actually getting what they pay for.
All right, we have about 9 minutes left, so maybe 2 more questions. Bill at the State Standard.
Yeah, 2 things. So first, a follow-up for Senator Robinson on Josh's question. When you say put the tax relief in the bill, can you elaborate a little bit on how that could look? And then second question for Senator Robinson and Representative Ormsby. Without further tax increases, do you see the state budget as on a sustainable trajectory, or are we going to be back here year after year having this conversation if more taxes aren't put in place?
The first part of your question, I mean, you literally write into the bill language what tax, whether it's sales tax reduction or property tax, whatever it is. I'm not writing the bill, but it would be, I mean, it's possible to write all those reductions into the bill.
I guess I'm saying, are there any conversations going on about what specific taxes there might be relief with in that bill? I know you're not writing it, but just,
There are conversations. I think the governor in his press conference, when he talked about his support for it, mentioned some specifics that he would, possible. There are definitely conversations about that happening. And then what was the next part of your, sustainability. It's a matter of what services do the people of the state of Washington want from their state government? And then how are we, what are we able to provide and how are we going to provide them? I mean, I believe that people of Washington want good schools. They want behavioral health services. They want healthcare that's affordable and accessible. They want childcare to be available when they need it and affordable and accessible. I think we're going to need to grapple with what is the role of the state in providing all those services that the people expect government to provide for them. And how do we pay for it? I know folks like to say we just need to cut spending and find efficiencies. I would like to know exactly what spending people would like to cut, and to the extent that it makes up for the deficit that we're seeing. I mean, it is challenging to cut billions of dollars out of the state budget every year, and people feel those impacts. And those are all decisions that we are going to need to grapple with this year and in the years ahead.
Senator Gildon?
Yeah, I can just do a follow-up. Senator Robinson mentioned, some specific items that we could find some efficiencies on, and I'd just like to give you a few examples, if I may. And the first thing I think we actually should do is we should limit the rate of growth of state government and tie it to some index, whether that's the median wage worker growth or whatever the index is, and then any revenue that the state takes above that index could be returned back to the people in some form of tax refund. But some of the specific things that we can do, I'll give you some examples. Paid family and medical leave. We found out recently that there are over 300,000 hours of paid family and medical leave that were paid to state employees who were also concurrently on sick leave. So they're taking sick leave and at the same time taking paid family and medical leave. That's 300,000 hours that we found just last year. I don't think that should be the case. I don't think that was the intent of the bill. I think the intent of paid family and medical leave is that once your sick leave is exhausted, then you can take your paid family and medical leave. The state Senate does not allow employees to do that, but the executive branch agencies do allow that. I think we can fix that, and that's going to save some real money. Spoke last year extensively about concurrent enrollment in Medicaid. About 130,000 people are concurrently enrolled in Washington State Medicaid and in Medicaid in another state. Those are wasted dollars. The monthly premiums that we're paying every month are wasted dollars that we should be saving. Representative Couture spoke about juvenile rehabilitation to age 25. If you look at it from just a strictly monetary perspective, it costs $260,000 per year per individual to house someone in our juvenile rehabilitation facilities. Conversely, it costs only $60,000 per year to house them in the Department of Corrections. And when you have people over the age of 18 who are taking up bed spaces in these juvenile rehabilitation facilities, it's resulted in overcrowding, and it has defeated the purpose of juvenile rehabilitation, which is to rehabilitate the juveniles, but they're not getting any rehabilitative services because of the overcrowding. But you're saving $200,000 per year per individual if you just make that move. Those are a couple of the things that we can do, as well as we need to right-size government. If you look at some of our agencies, you'll see middle management has just increased over 100% over the last few years, but the number of frontline workers has remained stagnant. I think we should reduce some of that middle management, hire more frontline workers so we can provide better direct services to the people of our state.
Representative Ormsby?
I'd just like to address the sustainability issue and on the bill itself, as Senator Robinson said, it will have rates in the bill. So it will be able to be unpacked. It will be able to be quantified. Relative to sustainability, I think we do have a sustainability issue given our tax structure, which has been decoupled with personal income. 15, 17 years ago, say prior Great Recession, the tax code was well in line with personal income. Those have decoupled given the historic changes. The economy has changed. Things are more expensive now. We have more people, we have inflation, we have abdication of our federal partners in their assistance on healthcare and food particularly. So that gives us pause, and we're going to need to balance this budget. There is no alternative, but looking for ways to do that responsibly without injuring people, without affecting the affordability issues that they're faced with in terms of food and other things. I think it's time to have a serious conversation about structural adequacy.
Just really quickly, and to add on to what Senator Gildon was saying about, some cuts. House Republicans recently proposed a Republican budget framework. It includes no new taxes, nearly $4 billion in cuts, and none of which affect vulnerable populations, and it fixes a lot of the problems of the past, like Medicaid and food assistance. We don't cut a single dime from schools. We don't cut a single dime from healthcare. We don't cut a single dime from public safety. No essential services for vulnerable people. So we have laid out a roadmap. It's published on our website. Anyone can read it right now. It's, 15, 20 pages long. It's very detailed. But there is a way to do it. You reduce, like Senator Gildon said, you reduce the scope and size of government, and you find where the waste is. And it's actually not that hard if you're actually trying to look for it. So we've put forth a responsible framework that I hope the majority can at least look at some of it and take some of it seriously and implement some of it, because I think that our state will be much better off if we work together in the budget room and Republicans are allowed to sit in the budget negotiations with the Democrats, and we have the ability to talk through some of these things. I think that's what the people of Washington State want. They want bipartisan cooperation. Not everyone will probably get what they want, but at least we'll all have a greater perspective in hearing each other's views. And I think that I put that out there. It's public on the website. I encourage you all to look at it. Pick it apart if you want, but that to us is a responsible first opening salvo to solving this problem and having true structural budget reforms and accountability so that we don't continuously face multi-billion-dollar deficits every single year and continue to have this conversation.
We have maybe 2 more minutes left, so one last quick question for Simone.
Hi. Critics have described the $1 million threshold on the so-called millionaire's tax as arbitrary. So Senator Robinson and Representative Ormsby, could you respond to that criticism and also talk about why you would support a tax for those earning $1 million and not, say, $900,000 to bring up John's number?
I think that's yet to be determined, right? So the threshold that's been discussed is $1 million. I think everyone has an idea in their mind what that encompasses, and I think it will be, how much money does that bring in? There's just a lot of decisions that need to be made, and that threshold, may appear arbitrary, is going to very much have to do with the benefits of the revenue that the state would see, and not in the short term, but in the out years. And so that also allows time to make adjustments to make that number less arbitrary and to actually fund state government and provide affordability to our residents.
All righty, we're just about out of time. Any quick responses, Senator Robinson?
People of Washington have been very clear through recent initiatives that they support taxing wealth in this state in exchange for clean air, clean water, good schools, childcare, early learning, and that is what I think this proposal is attempting to match what we've heard from the people of Washington.
Senator Gildon, briefly.
No, well, thank you. This has been a good conversation. We're going to have a lot more coming out during session. And I just ask that all of you say a little prayer for the people of Washington State, because we need it.
All righty, Representative Couture, any brief final remarks?
No, thank you everyone for being here, and thank you for your interest. And, I look forward to finding a solution that doesn't include new taxes in the next session. I look forward to working with my colleagues across the aisle, Senator Robinson and Representative Ormsby, to make sure that we do the best thing for the people of Washington.
Alrighty, that concludes this panel. We will have our leadership panel coming up in about 2 minutes.
In the summertime, you'll see rafters on the river really enjoying the water. And through every season, you'll see different types of activities. People enjoying this scenic and beautiful valley. It's truly one of the most beautiful drives in our state, and it most certainly is one of my favorite places. Question always comes up. Where can you get the finest burger in Washington State? Who makes the best hamburgers? Well, I've tried them all. I've been to the Pickwick in Fife, the Iceberg in Walla Walla, the Lakeview at Lake Chelan, even to Fat Smitty's at Discovery Bay and Big Tom's here in Olympia. They're all good. So what's your favorite burger joint in Washington State? Well, I'll tell you this, every single one of them, my favorite places, my favorite burgers. Send us your nomination.
Support for My Favorite Places is provided by the Washington Hospitality Association and by Weatherly Inn, senior living where it's home and your family.
Washington State is an outlier in terms of its liability laws around condo construction. That's led to a lot of home builders getting out of the market to build the condos because it's so expensive. There's a lot of risk.
We need to hurry up and get a little bit more people in shelter, permanent shelters. And kid homes seems to be an obvious natural fit to that.
This is really one of the most incredible places in the state of Washington. This is Limekiln State Park on the west side of San Juan Island. It's from this location that people could come and watch orcas or killer whales right on the shoreline. You could virtually stand above on the rocks and look straight down on the whales. In 1984, the Reagan administration transferred this location to us for $1. I think it was the best buy in the history of the state. This is truly one of the most incredible places in the state of Washington. Kids and adults alike just come here every day of the year to watch whales in the wild. Right here in the west side of San Juan Island, Limekiln State Park. It truly is one of my most favorite places in our entire state.
The floor is yours, Shauna.
All right, we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Shauna Soursby. I'm with the Seattle Times. Here with us, we have a leadership. This is Speaker of the House Lori Jenkins. This is Senate Majority Leader Jamie Peterson. House Minority Leader Drew Stokesbury and Senate Minority Leader John Braun. So I guess to start off, let's just go ahead and talk about your priorities for each caucus this session.
Thank you, Shauna, and thanks everybody for being here. You know, I think the 2026 session, we definitely start off with some pretty significant headwinds. Most significantly, the harmful policies that have been passed by the federal administration, the federal government, and the attacks of the federal government on states like Washington. I think, you know, President Trump's tariffs are causing much higher inflation in the state. They're causing a lot of uncertainty because they go back and forth daily, so there's no way for our business community to really plan for or around them. And they're causing greater prices for our families here in Washington state. So everything from food to clothing to furniture to cars to lumber, you name it. So there's nothing we can do about the tariffs, but there are things that we can do to help Washingtonians. We can, you know, come together and try to get good policy done, make sure that at every chance we have to push back on bad federal policy that we can do that, where we can have an effect on affordability for Washingtonians, we can work on that, and our own budget challenges here that have been, you know, greatly contributed to by the federal government. Nonetheless, we are going to have to address our own budget challenges. So those, I think, will be our biggest priorities this session.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Our priorities are in the Senate Democratic Caucus are largely aligned with what you heard from the speaker. I would say, number one, we are going to do everything that we can to protect people in our state from a really malevolent, hostile federal government. And, you know, aside from the tariffs and all of the bad effects on the economy, we see attacks on immigrants, really weaponization of the military, the National Guard to oppress people all over the country. We see attacks on transgender people all over the country. We see attacks on science and on research. So we're going to be looking for every opportunity that we can to make sure that vulnerable people are protected, to make sure that science and healthcare are protected. Including supporting the West Coast Health Alliance and the scientifically based standards in terms of vaccines. So that's number one priority for us. Second priority is to face the current budget shortfall that we have, to overcome that, and to try to turn the ship so that we're in a better position in 2027 and going forward in terms of the long-term stability of our state budget. And then the third priority is really about everyone else's budget and the affordability crisis that we're facing. So we'll continue the historic work that we've been doing on trying to increase housing supply, some exciting bills there to continue that pattern. We'll also be working on what we can do to help with childcare and healthcare, other major expenses that folks face, because we know that for a lot of our citizens, we are facing really significant challenges in terms of affordability. So those are the three big focuses for us in this session. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. Washington State House Republicans are going to be focused on this Washington far more than the other Washington. We ran to represent our constituents in this Washington, not the other Washington. This Washington has problems that need solving, and we're going to be focused on providing solutions for the problems facing this Washington. There's a lot of problems that we're facing: rising crime rates, lowering educational outcomes, but the biggest one by far is the unaffordability crisis that continues to confront Washingtonians every morning, every day. This is not the federal government's fault. Tariffs don't explain why Washington has the second highest gas price of any state in the country. Tariffs don't explain why Washington has the fourth highest grocery prices of any state in the country. Tariffs don't explain why Washington has the fourth highest housing prices of any state in the country. Tariffs don't explain why Washington has the seventh most costly child care of any state in the country, or the third highest cost of living of any state in the country. Washington is uniquely expensive compared to nearly every other state. That is not a result of the federal policies. Federal policies don't target Washington. Washington state's policies target Washington. It is a result of decades of single-party governance that has resulted in Washington becoming more and more unaffordable. So House Republicans will be focused on providing relief to ordinary Washingtonians, things like reducing the sales tax on prepared food, reducing the sales tax on groceries, finding ways where Washingtonians can find some relief in their wallets. Part of this is also connected to the looming budget crisis facing the state. When we were here before you about a year ago, we had somewhere in the neighborhood of a $10 billion budget deficit. Despite raising $10 billion in new taxes, we yet again have another multi-billion-dollar budget deficit, and continuing to raise taxes will only make Washington more affordable, will only drive more jobs out of state, and introduce us into a perpetual cycle of continually trying to raise new taxes to be able to afford services that we shouldn't be in the business of providing in the first place. And all the while, Washingtonians are struggling to make ends meet. So House Republicans will be focused on one thing: making sure Washingtonians can continue to afford to live here in Washington.
Good morning, everyone. John Braun, thanks for being here. I'm going to just start by saying I agree with everything that Representative Stokesbury just said. And we have, you've heard me talk over the last several years, our focus has been affordability, public safety, education. I think that is still true, but the gap between public concern on affordability and all the other ones, which are also important, has grown to the point where the priorities are really affordability, affordability, affordability. And Representative Stokesbury is absolutely correct that Washington stands apart from the rest of the country as a result of the policies put in place by the majorities here in the legislature, whether it's food or gas or housing, childcare, healthcare, and across the board, those prices are being driven up by policies here in the state of Washington. And we need to find ways to push back on that. And so you're going to see Senate Republicans on every bill talk about how does this affect affordability in the near term, economically, but also in the medium and long term, how it affects our economy long term, how it affects opportunity long term for our citizens, and the cost that goes with that. Associated with that, we've seen a lot of talk in the news recently about potential or suspected or certainly credible suggestions that there may be fraud in some parts of our government. You've heard about the mortgage assistant program where we had very clear double dealing. You've heard about recent news having to do with daycares. And I want to be clear, that's been in the news a lot more lately, but that's an issue that has been talked about in state government for many years, is brought to us repeatedly by folks inside state government saying they have concerns about misuse and we should investigate. And frankly, you have not done a good enough job at doing that. We owe it to our citizens to do that. When you talk about affordability, that also means spending state resources wisely, carefully, and we owe it to them. Whether these allegations are true or not true, they deserve investigation. If they are true, there should be consequences. If they're not true, people need to understand that so we maintain trust in government. Super important if we're going to move our state forward and get back to a place where people can afford to live and live well here in the state of Washington. We're going to have to take that on. Thank you.
One quick follow-up for Senator Peterson. You mentioned some housing bills. Can you expand on those a little bit and talk about those a little bit more?
Sure, I'll just start with one. Senator Alvarado has a bill that I think came out of the roundtable, actually, and some work that Challenge Seattle has been doing, essentially requiring cities to allow areas that are zoned like commercial, so think underused sort of strip malls, to be converted into residential uses. If you think about it, in those areas largely have good utilities already provided. There are, by definition, roads there. In addition, there's often transit service for them. So they are perfect places for infill dense residential development. And I think the Lieutenant Governor's task force as well identified that that is a potential way very quickly to bring online a chunk of the undersupply of housing that we are faced, really help stabilize prices by increasing supply.
The public defense system is notably strained currently, and public defenders warn lawmakers in December that this could lead to further public safety issues. I'm wondering if there's any appetite from any of the caucuses this year to address the public defense system, and if there's anything specific you think could be done to address the issue.
I guess I'll just say, one of the things I'm very pleased about is actually the crime rates are falling in Washington State. All the data that we're getting says that both violent and property crimes are going down at a very significant rate, as they are all across the nation and have been since 2023. So I think that's good, and that will be helpful in this realm. The primary, I think, issue in the public defense arena is the caseload standards that the Supreme Court has adopted. So it's really a financial investment that we have to consider making. This is a challenging budget year, so will we be able to make progress on that? What kind of progress will we be able to make? I think is still a question to be answered, but it certainly is something. I think you all just talked to the budget teams. I'm not sure if you asked them about it, but I know it will be something on their minds as they go through negotiating the budget.
Yeah, I agree. This is an important problem we need to solve, and an important component in maintaining a functional criminal justice system. Just like you can't send someone to jail if there's not a police officer on the street to arrest them, you also can't send somebody to jail if they can never get a trial because they don't have an attorney. So we need a well-functioning system. It does cost money, as the speaker has said. I think this is a priority of House Republicans. I think every year, as long as I can remember, the House Republican has had a bill to try to find a creative way to drive funding to solve this problem. The speaker is right. We have a limited set of dollars, and budgets need to prioritize those dollars wisely. I think Republicans would highly prioritize public defenders to make sure that the criminal justice system is working well.
I'm going to agree in large part. We're definitely an issue we should prioritize and we can address within our means. The caseload issue from the state Supreme Court is going to force us to do that sooner rather than later. So hopefully sooner. This is something Senator Torres and our caucus has been working on for several years, well before the current budget crisis. So it's not a new issue. It's an issue we'll continue to push on. I will say that while we have seen the crime rates come down, and I think everybody could agree that's a good thing, there is some genuine concern that that's not all entirely because crime has reduced. It's also a result of failure on reporting. Reporting is really suffering based on the quality of data we're seeing is not good. And the other thing I'd say is even if it is accurate, which I think we should be cautious there, it's still historically high. So we have a lot of work to do on public safety, and for that reason alone, this should be a priority.
I guess I will say, the counties for many years have faced a structural budget problem. We are facing that now, finally. But for counties where, 65, 70% of their revenue comes from property tax, and where property tax for base operations of counties has been constrained to grow at no more than 1% for the last 20 years, we are seeing the effect of that in terms of the entire criminal justice system, prosecutors, defenders, courts. And that's the context in which we have this pressure that's led to the change in caseload standards. In the longer term, I mean, I think we have some real issues to face about whether we're going to have the state take on that responsibility. From my perspective, the better thing, and I'm working on some ideas in that area, but the better thing would be for us to fix the revenue picture for counties and local governments so that they can continue effectively to handle this long-term problem that they have.
All right, I'll go ahead and open it up to questions. John?
Brian Haywood turned in his two initiative petitions. I'm assuming they probably have enough signatures to pass muster to go to the legislature. Do either one of those petitions have any chance of passing the legislature this session? And if not, what does everyone think of their chances of passing in a November referendum?
Well, I guess I think they have been provisionally certified. They haven't been fully certified. That's the last that I heard, both of them. Just so folks know what we're talking about. The first one repeals the expansion of parental rights that the legislature passed last year and repeals the clarifications that we adopted and would return back to an earlier version, which with some slimmed down parental rights. And I guess my commentary really to a much less clear set of laws. So that's what the voters will have to decide when it gets to the ballot. And then the second one will be a very stark decision for, I think, voters in this state, is whether or not they want to subject every girl who's over 12 years old in this state who wants to participate in sports to an invasive genital examination in return for making sure that transgender girls, which we've had less than a dozen or so over the last decade in Washington state sports, do not participate. That'll be the question voters will be asked. I don't think that we'll be taking action in the House on it, and I think voters will have the chance to decide. And I don't think at this point, I'm not here, nor do I know if I'm authorized ethically to give predictions on outcomes of that. But that's I think, a question that voters will decide.
The Senate Democrats are 100% aligned with what the Speaker said. I am certain that we will not be passing either of those initiatives, and I think it's unlikely that we'll hear them. I think they'll be up to the voters to decide.
Okay, just to challenge one thing, and then I want the opinions of the other two. Is a genital check, does the language actually call for a genital check? Is someone going to actually pull open the front of a girl's shorts and check what they're packing?
I actually think it's more extensive than that, John. It's an examination. It's not.
No, it is not.
Yeah. So
Can we
it's pretty significant.
just press back on that? Because even Como News has debunked that lie that's been repeated over and over. And even the Washington State Department of Health, the Association for Pediatrics, every major medical institution in the state says this is part of a regular well exam and a physical exam for student athletes, that they have to have a physical examination. So who are you accusing of potentially inflicting improper genital exams on girls? Are you suggesting doctors are doing this? Are you suggesting coaches are doing this?
I'm suggesting that the initiative requires this. And so your statements and your position on the initiative will be something that the voters can take into account. And I mean, you can make your political case on it. That's my interpretation of the initiative is what I've said, and I think that there are plenty of folks who've looked objectively at the initiative, and that's what it would require.
Because the The WIA already states that student athletes are required to undergo a physical examination every other year if they'd like to participate in sports. So they already require it, so I guess I've heard.
Well, then I guess the initiative isn't necessary.
Well, the issue is they'd have to attest to whether it's a biological boy or a biological girl, which their pediatrician would be able to do easily. So I'm confused, I guess, why that line keeps getting pushed if the Legacy News, I mean, you can accuse me of having an opinion on it, I do, but even Legacy News has debunked what you're saying, and I've heard from parents who are concerned that you're pushing this lie suggesting that their student athletes are going to be molested or subject to genital exams. It's a very strange
I never used that term,
But that's kind
Ms.
of what
Cruz.
the
I never
suggestion
used that term. What I said was that there would be invasive medical exams, and that's exactly what the initiative authorizes and does. It's what it does.
Okay, let's get back to John's initial question for Stokesbury. We'll start with you.
You guys have anything you want to throw in?
Yeah, obviously, I lack the votes in my caucus to unilaterally force any particular outcome, but I do think regardless of one's opinions on the matter, I think we owe it to the voters and the people of Washington and the 400,000+ individuals who signed these initiatives to consider them. It's also our constitutional obligation. The state constitution is very clear that initiatives to the legislature shall take precedence over all other matters. And we just heard that there is a fundamental dispute over what the language does, to what extent it changes current law, to what extent is mandated. What better place to have these debates and bring in experts than to hold hearings? So, Madam Speaker, I hope that we hold hearings on these initiatives so that we can hear from the WIAA, so that we can hear from pediatricians, so that we can hear from parents, so that we can hear from student athletes to understand to what extent the initiative would change the requirement for physical examination versus to what extent it would simply change the rules for who's eligible to compete in girls' sports. We live in a beautiful system of representative democracy, and what better chance to hash out these debates than to hold hearings on the bills and hold debates on the bills in accordance with the state constitution, which says these initiatives shall take precedence over all other matters we consider. So I think we should hear them and debate them. The legislature, there's 98 of us in the House, 49 in the Senate. We'll choose whether to pass them now. If not, it'll go to the voters, who will get to decide. But I and I think every other Republican will gladly say that parents should be more involved in schools and that girls' sports should be for girls.
Okay, I just want to challenge that. The second one, the parental right things, has a very strong transgender subtext to it. Both Senator Peterson and Representative Jenkins, they spent many years trying to get marriage equality and probably other rights that I can't think of right at this moment for people of their orientation. Why in the heck would they be sympathetic toward a hearing or doing anything regarding taking rights away from transgenders? It's
Well, I don't think we're taking rights away from transgender children any more than my right was taken away to not play girls' tennis. I don't have a right to play girls' tennis. I played boys' tennis when I was in high school.
They had a right to get married, and they did not.
I think that's a pretty strong false equivalency there, John. Nobody's taking rights away here. We simply the supporters of the initiative simply want to keep girls' sports fair and allow girls to play girls' sports and have biological boys play boys' sports. Whether we like it or not, there's a fundamental genetic difference between boys and girls. That's why we have boys and girls sports. Even if you accept the current science that gender is a social construct, biology is not a social construct. Biology is biology, and that's why we delineate between boys and girls sports. So this isn't about taking away anybody's rights any more than it is about, nobody said 50 years ago when we started creating girls sports, nobody thought we were taking away boys' rights. We're not taking away rights here. And with respect to the parents' rights initiatives, we're simply clarifying and insisting that parents have a right to know what's happening with their kids. Kids belong to their parents, not to the state. This has nothing to do with whether or not kids are allowed to become transgender or undergo a transition. It simply says that parents should be informed of things that are happening with their kids at school. I think that's pretty fair, and I think most parents in Washington would want to know what's happening with their kids at school.
Okay, we really need to move on to some other questions. Chris?
Do you want me to?
Mike? Let me ask about another non-controversial issue. The measure that's now been floated, an amendment to the Washington State Constitution that, if passed, would allow mid-cycle redistricting of Washington State, following the lead of other states, and it would go to the voters if approved. I'm curious to hear from the Democratic caucus, since this is sponsored by 2 Democrats, if you support the idea of early redistricting of Washington State.
Yeah, I think that if you look at the comments that Majority Leader Fitzgibbon has already given to the press, he acknowledges that when he filed this, that it would start a good conversation and actually help to educate the public about the challenges of doing any changes to our redistricting plan in Washington State. Just to back up a little bit, I would never have wanted to do this, no, historically, but when you have a president who has pushed mid-cycle redistricting in like a dozen states across the country to try and gain an advantage mid-cycle, there are very few tools that are left to move forward. So I think it will be a good question. It will be a good discussion to help voters understand that in Washington, you can't just do, for example, what California did or what some other states have done. We would require a constitutional amendment with a 2/3 majority vote. And so I think that really what this calls into question is, of my Republican colleagues, do they support the mid-cycle redistricting that's been happening all around the country? Do they support that, or do they not support that?
Well, like I said at the beginning, I was elected to solve Washington's problems. I certainly was elected to solve Texas's or California's problems. Never lived in either of those states. I'm not elected to the legislature there. I don't really have much of an opinion on what those other states do. I do care about what we do here in Washington. The prime sponsor of this legislation was asked over the summer if Washington would consider mid-cycle redistricting, and he said it is not on the table for us. 6 months later, he has introduced a bill to do just that. So I hope the public remembers when Democrats say later this session that the income tax will only ever apply to millionaires, that Democrats have not always kept their word. In this case, it took the Democrat majority leader 6 months to go from saying redistricting mid-cycle is not on the table for us to proposing a constitutional amendment to do just that. In every election, every statewide election this cycle, this decade, no Democrat got more than 60% of the vote, yet they hold 80% of the state's congressional seats. To do mid-cycle redistricting, to get that ratio up to 90 or 100%, would suggest that democracy is not on the line, as the majority leader says, unless your definition of democracy is that of Saddam Hussein and Vladimir Putin. But I don't think that Democrats need Hussein or Putin-like numbers to stay in control of this state. I think that voters are very well served by our current constitutional, bipartisan, voter-approved system, and I don't support any changes to it.
I do not support mid-cycle redistricting. My position is consistent with what I said in the summer. I do think if you look at the train wreck that was the 2021 redistricting process, I'm afraid I have to disagree slightly with my colleague from the 31st district and say that I think that there are some important revisions to the process that we ought to consider. Some of those are just statutory changes that we could make about the deadlines and about transparency in the process. We can certainly consider revisions in the structure of the process as well, but those would have to be bipartisan, broadly agreed bills, and I don't think that this is one that would have that support. So.
Senator Peterson, you said at the beginning that Senator Peterson, you said at the beginning that one of the key priorities for Senate Democrats would be to make sure science is respected. Can you acknowledge that there are biological differences between men and women that would give boys a physical advantage over girls in athletics?
No, I don't think I could say that definitively. First of all, I'm not I don't have the scientific expertise to be able to weigh in on that. Based on what I know, many of the kids who participate in athletics who are transgender are taking puberty blockers, are taking hormones that probably change the scientific balance about competitiveness. So I don't have the tools or the training to be able to weigh in and offer a scientific conclusion about that. But I think that there is some reason to be skeptical of that claim. Thank you.
Would you be willing to make that a requirement?
We need to move on. Sorry, we need to move on. Bill?
Yeah, so, sorry, just first, just a quick one circling back to the initiatives. Can Speaker Jenkins and Majority Leader Pearson, can you just confirm that neither chamber will hold hearings on either initiative? Is that correct, or do you plan to hold hearings?
There's no plan to hold hearings in the House.
And there is no plan to hold hearings in the Senate.
And then the other question I had is on the income tax and the possibility of building some form of tax relief into that legislation. The governor put some ideas out there that had to do with the sales tax. Do either of you have preferences for how that tax relief component might look, and will it be built into the bill itself?
Well, thank you for asking that. Yes, I have some pretty strong preferences about that, although, ultimately it's 75 people, the 50 in the House and 25 in the Senate, that will have to come to some agreement about that. And the Speaker and Representative Fitzgibbon and I have had some robust conversations about that. An idea, so first of all, I would say I share a big idea with the governor, which is that we ought to use a significant portion of the proceeds to provide a permanent, stable funding source for the Working Families Tax Credit. That is a fantastic program that has enjoyed bipartisan support, and that right now is just coming from resources in the general fund. I think having a great way to pay for that and provide an offset to our uniquely regressive, bad tax system that we've had for the last 90-some years would be a good use of proceeds. Second, I would love to see us take a portion of the proceeds and essentially put it in at what we receive, say 10% of what we receive each year, and then put that in an escrow that would reduce the aggregate state property tax for the following year, and then have the auditors put onto, or the assessors put onto the property tax statements for everybody, reduction due to millionaire tax, X $100 to whatever it is, depending on their tax situation. So, those are a couple of ideas. I think we have also had discussions about either very targeted sales tax relief, so taking sales tax off of goods like diapers or over-the-counter medicines, or a broader tax relief, although I think, probably that would be a relatively modest reduction in the sales tax. We've talked about gas tax. We've talked about both the small business taxes that the governor raised and potentially rolling back some of the B&O tax changes that we made in the last. So we have a wide variety of options. And I think there will be robust discussion about it. The big picture, though, is that I absolutely believe that a significant portion of the proceeds, if that idea moves forward, will need to be dedicated to reductions of regressive taxes. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Simone?
Hi. In the previous panel, there was some discussion of the millionaire's tax potentially leading to capital flight. So Senator Peterson and Speaker Jenkins, could you respond to concerns that this would drive innovators and jobs from the state, ultimately backfiring in terms of revenue?
Well, I guess I'll just say that any tax we ever pass, that's the argument about it. So I think the focus of the millionaire's tax is really to address our regressivity in this state and to start shifting to make our tax structure more fair. I talked to a lot of people who, would likely be subjected to it, and they actually have as much of an investment in fairness as folks who are paying at the low end of, in our state right now, like the poorest 20% of Washingtonians pay 4 times as much per dollar in taxes as the wealthiest 5% do, right? People recognize that as unfair, and they want to achieve fairness there. So, this is certainly things that we will work with the business community on, talking through that, talking through the effects, talking through what reductions actually address regressivity for them the most, as well as, talking to folks about what individual regressivity is, what kind of effects that's having. So I don't think to jump to that is really the way to go. We certainly have had over cap gains. We've had like one big taxpayer leave the state, which everyone knows who that is, and move to Florida. But for the most part, folks have stayed and have been very participatory in the work that we've been doing on our tax reforms.
The other thing that I'd like to say about context is that we have just lived through a year with the passage of H.R. 1, where we have this dramatic contrast between significant tax cuts for billionaires and millionaires on the one hand, and then dramatic attacks on benefits that go to poor people on the other hand, right? And I think that people in our state, including very patriotic, wealthy people, are feeling that and are wanting to help make sure that that's not the dynamic in Washington, right? The second thing that I would say is that when you think about actual behavior that's driven by tax system, what may lead to real changes in terms of people's choices that they make about where to reside are when you become an outlier state, right? And so if you think about the ways in which Washington is an outlier, I think in hindsight, we made a mistake this last year by creating a top marginal rate for the estate tax that is so much higher than the rate in any state. And anecdotally, at least, I have heard that there are people who, because of that, are making a decision to change their residence. I guess time will tell if that happens, and we may have an opportunity to reconsider that in this session or in coming sessions. When you think about the income tax, 41 states have some form of a personal income tax. 43 states have some form of income tax. If you look at the top marginal rates for various states, and certainly our main comparator states, whether that's Oregon, California, Colorado, Hawaii, Illinois, New York, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Connecticut, Massachusetts, I think what you'd find is that nearly all of them have a top marginal rate that is higher than the 9.9% that we've been talking about. So yes, it is true that there are places that have no income tax. And if someone decides that that's really the way that they want to organize their life, they have an opportunity to avoid it by changing their domicile and living there. But for most people, aside from the fact that I think a lot of them would be happy to pay their fair share and supporting the services in the state, having a robust, good safety net, having a strong public school system, strong higher education system. I don't think that there is a strong likelihood that they're going to change their domicile on that basis. And I think, to the speaker's point, that's what we've seen with capital gains, where we established a tax rate that is consistent with or lower than what we see in most other states.
I I'm glad Senator Peterson sort of alluded to the fact that there's still a handful of other states without an income tax, because I think that provides a helpful data point for us. Population growth amongst the states with no income tax, which includes Washington for now, is 82% higher than it is for states with an income tax. That's according to U.S. Census data. So the data clearly shows that there really is a connection between where people choose to live and whether or not an income tax that state has an income tax. 82% greater population growth in non-income tax states compared to income tax states. That doesn't just manifest itself in where the people land, it manifests itself in the state's economy. GDP growth of non-income tax states is 28% higher than it is in states with income tax. Personal income growth is 67% higher among states with no income tax than it is in states with an income tax. And job growth is 28% higher in states without an income tax than it is in states with an income tax. So the question is not just do we want to attract people or not, it's do we want to attract jobs and economic growth or not? I think we do, and this should matter for everybody, regardless if you're a Republican or a Democrat, because all of the things that we've talked about so far today, public defense spending, public health spending, requires a robust economy and a robust tax base to fund all that. Washington has one of the highest average starting teacher salaries of any state in the country. We have the most generous college financial aid package of any state in the country. We've got one of the most robust Medicaid systems in the country, both in terms of who we cover and what is covered. All of that is possible because of the economy that exists in this state, because companies like Boeing decided to call Washington home 100 years ago. Microsoft called Washington home 50 years ago. Amazon called Washington home 25 years ago. We have all sorts of major employers here, from Starbucks to T-Mobile to Expedia to Costco, that call Washington home in part because of our economic and tax policy. And if we are too disruptive to that, we not just drive those jobs out of state, we prevent the next generation of innovators and entrepreneurs from locating in Washington, and they're going to choose places like Austin and Miami instead. And not only are we going to be caught in the cycle of always trying to expand the income tax to keep up with state spending, but we're going to run out of money to fund all these programs that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, so staunchly think that we need. So I think we need a good economic policy, and that does not include an income tax.
I good to go? That's excellent. All right. So I'm just going to reinforce what Drew just said. This isn't just anecdotal about capital flight. It is happening and has been happening for several years now. The capital gains income tax started it. The increase, primarily the increase in capital gains and the excise and the death tax have accelerated it. I could sit here afterwards and probably give you 2 or 3 dozen folks who have relocated just in the last 6 to 9 months, and many, many more that are planning it. That doesn't include the companies that are already planning it. And I want to be clear. The signal's been sent. They're not welcome here, and they're planning. Whether they pull the trigger or not, we'll know the day they do it. They won't tell us ahead of time. They'll just decide, and you'll see the effects in our revenue immediately. That's what we're faced here. We are sending a signal to businesses and folks who can afford to relocate that you're no longer welcome here, and they are receiving that signal and acting accordingly. And that will have long-term negative effects on our economy. But in addition to that, I'd just like to point out that income tax is something that we have debated in our state for many, many years. I see Tim Imons here, and he's got a sticker. I think there may be one there for every time the people have rejected this idea at the ballots. This is a deeply unpopular opinion or idea across income levels. And I want to say another thing, just to follow up on something that Representative Stokesbury said. When you look at migration numbers, folks moving en masse from income tax states to non-income tax states, that's not at a particular income level. It's across income levels. People at all income levels say, this is prohibiting me from living the life I want for me and my family. I'm going to go somewhere that cares about my future, cares about my opportunity. And increasingly, because of policies put forth by the Democratic majority, they no longer think that state government here in Washington cares about them, their families, and their future.
All right, we have time for a couple more questions. Jonathan?
Yeah, I want to ask about the tort liability bomb that's going off in state agencies. I want to ask about the tort liability bomb going off in state agencies. The self-insurance fund is projected about $3 billion in the hole by about 2030. What are your plans this session to deal with this, both in the short and the long term?
Well, I think this is, I'm glad you brought it up, and this is a big challenge, something we should have been talking about, and frankly, Republicans have been talking about for several years. And I want to start by saying this is tragic. $500 million a year isn't just a huge cost that we cannot afford at the state level. Think of the harm that the state has done to folks in their care, primarily children, to cause those kinds of rulings. We should all be deeply saddened and frankly embarrassed that that's how our state government has operated for many, many years. How we fix it is more challenging. The first step isn't to change the process so that the awards are lower. The first step is to think, how do we do less harm to those in our care, in particular to children in our care? And we have some serious problems. Many of you heard me talk about the challenges in our juvenile rehabilitation program, and the cost of that, the tort cost of that, is just starting. And this is not something, and you'll hear this argument from many on the other side, that this is all stuff that was done decades ago, and there's some truth to that. But we are doing damage right now today in our state because of policies put in place like JR 25 that we were not prepared to execute in a safe way without hurting, frankly, both the people in our care and the staff that take care of them. We got a long ways to go. We're not going to solve it by simply changing the tort liability system, although I am certainly in favor of that. We need to change it by changing the way we deal with people that we are required to take care of.
I agree with everything Senator Braun said. I'll only add one point, which is, as a factual matter, one single political party has occupied the executive residence every day since literally the day I was born. John Spellman's last day in office was the day I was born. Ever since then, there's been 40 uninterrupted years of one party appointing every single head of every agency and every department in the state. At some point, we need to recognize that the current status quo is failing, that new ideas and new perspectives are needed. I hope that is coming with our new governor. I hope this is a question that you ask him when he comes in a few minutes. But I think absolutely we need to do a better job, not just in figuring out how we fund the current liability confronting us, but how do we avoid causing this harm in the future? Because for 40 years, I think we've been stuck in the mud.
So first of all, I would say one of the reasons that the governor had such a significant challenge in terms of balancing the budget was that he's taking on in his supplemental budget proposal the idea of funding the tort liability account. That is the biggest single expenditure that he was taking on in the supplemental budget. The second thing that I would say is that Senator Dingra has been working with stakeholders and with the governor's office and the attorney general on some process changes for how claims would be filed and dealt with in their initial stages that I think folks think are quite promising, potentially in terms of speeding access to justice for people who have been harmed, but also reducing the likelihood of these very significant awards that we've been seeing. You know, the reality is that we had a single change approved by the legislature. I think it was originally a Republican bill about the statute of limitations for childhood sexual abuse that has driven a lot of the increase in claims activity. I don't disagree at all with Senator Braun. I think when we have victims, we need to focus on changing the systems to make sure that we're taking care of the people who are in state care. At the same time, it's, I think, important to acknowledge that when you have very old claims, and some of these are very old claims, they become incredibly difficult to defend. And so that's put the torts division at the Attorney General's office in a tough position. So I think there, as with the housing issue, we didn't get into this problem in the course of a session or two. It's going to take us a while to dig out of it, but I think we are attentive to it and are looking forward to having some good discussion this session about how to tackle those issues.
I'll just add briefly, I don't have any disagreement at all with what Senator Peterson just said, and some agreement with actually what Senator Braun said, in terms of our obligations to make sure that those that are in our care have the best care, and are treated well in Washington's care, and that's a place where we continually need to improve on the care that we provide in all sorts of very high-risk situations. But I just talked to Senator Dingra last night, and I know that Rep. Taylor, the chair of the Civil Rights and Judiciary Committee, and the House is working with her. And I think we're very intrigued by the work that the proposal from the governor's office, and are excited to see where we can go with that.
All right, Jerry? Probably going to be our last question.
A budget shortfall question. The governor makes two very big moves to try to get to a balanced ledger sheet. He moves $700 million in the Climate Commitment Act account in the general fund, and he drains half of the rainy day fund. I wondered if each of you could comment on whether you agree with those two moves. If not, what are the big moves your caucus is looking at to deal with the shortfall?
Oh, sure. I'll jump right in there. I agree with one, don't agree with the other. Moving the CCA to cover working families tax credit is something that we proposed in the Republican budget last year. We think it makes sense. It's allowed under statute. In fact, it's the top of the list in terms of allowable uses. And you have to acknowledge that the Climate Commitment Act is a very regressive program. We talk a lot about that around here. It's time we did something about it. To use that money to help folks at the lower end of the economic scale with a working families tax credit is, I think, the absolutely the right thing to do. And I would add, on top of that, the other ways we've spent that money, presumably to reduce carbon, have done very little to reduce carbon. And even that has, as we saw recently, has sometimes been wildly overstated. So it's not like we're taking that money out of some magic carbon reducing program and putting it somewhere else. We're just taking it and we're helping folks who most need to afford to live here in the state of Washington. So I think that's a good move, and I appreciate the governor doing that. Taking money out of the rainy day fund when it is not in fact a rainy day, I think, is the wrong answer. We are not in a recession. Employment is growing, although not as fast as it once did. Our revenue is growing, although not as fast as it once did. But what we do know is that we will be in a recession someday, and if we use this money now when we are not, instead of just applying good, sound budget principles and meeting the priorities of government, we are going to get ourselves in a bad situation in the future. The recent study came out, said Washington, I think, is currently the worst prepared in the country when it comes to a reserve account. That's in part because we have repeatedly used the rainy day fund when we didn't need to do it. Instead of making tough budget decisions, we should do that now. Make the hard budget decisions, live within our means, and make sure we have a healthy rainy day account when we really need it.
I agree with Senator Braun on both points. As he mentioned, using Climate Commitment Act dollars to fund the Working Families Tax Credit has been a Republican priority and proposal for the last several years. Governor Ferguson said last year that we shouldn't really care if something is a Republican idea or a Democrat idea. We should just care if it's a good idea. So I appreciate him following Republicans' lead on this issue and recognizing the good idea that we had. And as Senator Braun points out, the CCA has shown to only reduce carbon by something like 0.008% so far. So this is a far better use of the money to, if we can't get rid of the regressive CCA, to at least ameliorate its regressive characteristics to the extent possible. And then likewise, I agree with him on the lack of wisdom of rating the rainy day fund. That should be an absolute last resort, not your first move out of the gate. We have yet to completely scrub the budget. We've yet to zero base it. We've yet to audit our state agencies. We've yet to understand the extent of daycare fraud in this state. We should not, the day one move should not be to raid the rainy day fund. The day one moves should be to figure out how we can root out all the waste and fraud, figure out which programs aren't working, and no matter how good of an idea they are, and save money that way rather than simply raid the piggy bank.
All right, we just have like 3 minutes left if you guys want to.
Leave a minute for me.
All right, maybe I'll even leave two. I would say generally, what I have encouraged my caucus to do is not to draw any lines in the sand. Obviously, it's not ideal either to be using Climate Commitment Act dollars for things other than carbon reduction, and it's not ideal to be spending money out of the budget stabilization account. And at the same time, we're going to have a lot of other choices that we're going to make that are not ideal because we are in the second year of a biennium facing a significant shortfall, and so we're going to have to make difficult choices. That will be one of the big themes of this session. Compared to some of the other difficult choices that we may have to make, I suspect that both of those ideas in some form may be part of the final budget that helps us get out of here on time, which is I'm very committed to.
I would just say that it is true that the CCA, the Working Families Tax Credit is an authorized expenditure. I think there's a lot of discussion within our caucus about whether or not that's the best expenditure or not of CCA funds. And I think, it's really too early for me to say how that's going to end up in the budget. On the rainy day fund, I just do want to note that we have like $170 million tab that the federal government has sent us to build IT systems to be able to start denying people Medicaid in this state and food. Like, how are we going to pay for that? We have to find a way to pay for that. And that is part of what is driving the need for rainy day funds. I think the estimate right now is almost $170 million just for those kinds of things. The final thing I just want to say is about these suggestions about fraud with really no basis yet. Listen, every person in Washington state is entitled to make sure that we have well-running, functioning government systems. We have a state auditor who audits our agencies every year and has many times pointed out areas for improvement. But when you look at our child care system, DCYF itself has done a number of audits. Last year, they did 29,000 consumer audits. They did 1,400 provider audits, finding no widespread abuse. Now, you can ask the state auditor to go ahead and check on that, but to cavalierly suggest that there is some kind of fraud going on when we have been doing that kind of work, I think is unfair to child care providers. It's unfair to the people who are receiving child care in this state. It's unfair to our kids, and it's unfair to the agencies who are working very hard to provide great services to Washingtonians.
All right, thank you all very much.
Whoever was the clapper, thank you.